After 4 long, drawn-out years of investigation, it was just announced on Friday from the District Attorney of Los Angeles that Marilyn Manson is not going to have any Me Too-related charges brought against him. He was accused of sexual assault and domestic violence by Evan Rachel Wood and 4 other women back in 2021, you might recall. And this has been heavily covered by a lot of different creators. We're going to obviously shout out Colonel Kurtz on this one. She's been following this story very deeply. We have not, but she has strong thoughts on this matter.
Colonel Kurtz
I just want to go over the press release. This press release is funny. The LA District Attorney Nathan Hochman announced on Friday that his office will not be pursuing charges against Marilyn Manson. Here was the press release. We have determined that allegations of domestic violence fall outside of the statute of limitations, and we cannot prove charges of sexual assault beyond a reasonable doubt. But here's this next part. He decides to still pay lip service to supporting the Me Too accusations, despite the fact that they cannot be proven.
Shouldn't be his job.
This is not, no, that's not, his job is not to run PR for accusers.
They did this with Trump, with Comey, and where they said well, we couldn't prove it. We couldn't prove him guilty, but we couldn't prove that he was innocent either. Yeah, your job is not to prove that he's innocent. Your job is to prove that somebody is guilty.
Right. So he continued saying, we recognize and applaud the courage and resilience of the women who came forward to make reports and share their experiences, and we thank them for their cooperation and patience with the investigation. While we're unable to bring charges in this matter, we recognize that the strong advocacy of women involved has helped bring greater awareness to the challenges faced by survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault. We also acknowledge and commend them for making an important contribution to extending the statute of limitations for the prosecution of domestic abuse locally and throughout the nation. Due to their efforts, victims of domestic violence have a greater voice in our criminal justice system, and prosecutorial offices around the country have improved tools to hold domestic violence abusers accountable for their actions.
There's a 20 there.
From Evan Perry. Thanks for updating the crisis party sound. It needs to be more jarring. That would help me stay alert during my last 2 hours of the workday.
I thought it was plenty jarring.
It needs to be more jarring.
What does that mean?
It needs to be louder. We need more explosions.
I mean, the thing is with the bump in audio gain, it's creating a bunch of distortion that makes the actual lyrics hard to hear, especially I'm betting for the people listening.
Doesn't even matter.
So you just want indistinguishable noise,
yes,
which is what I used to do anyways, and you hated that.
Despite the decision necessitated by the facts and evidence in this matter, the LA County District Attorney's Office remains fully committed to seeking justice for survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault whenever legally possible. We encourage anyone experiencing abuse to seek support and make a report to law enforcement as quickly as possible. So essentially, he's saying everything but that he believes the women, despite a lack of evidence. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why he would have an interest in doing so as the LA District Attorney. That is not your job and not your place to say.
They had to spend a fortune to run this investigation too. I mean, they were traveling everywhere to interview witnesses. Mm-hmm. This cost the taxpayers a lot of money.
And he's acting like this somehow helped real victims. As all of you already know, and it doesn't even need to be repeated, but false allegations or even just dubious allegations that lack evidence hurt real victims. We know this, but the person who is most hurt in this situation is the person who gets falsely accused. Yep. Now, I'm not saying I believe one way or the other whether Marilyn Manson is guilty or innocent of any number of these allegations. I have no idea. To be honest, my instinct lends me to believe that a lot of them are true. That's just my intuition on the matter, my very unimportant opinion that has no merit in a legal proceeding. But I'm just saying, that's my feeling about the matter. And it's interesting that this happened right on the heel of him dropping his lawsuit for defamation against Evan Rachel Wood back in November.
Yeah.
Why did he decide to do that?
What's also weird is we're also coming into this age now where now the Neil Gaiman stuff is big not big in the news.
That's
but
like
is
the
also,
next one.
Is the Neil Gaiman story. Dark Horse dropped him with the allegations that are finally coming out now. A lot of there was YouTubers that covered that story. I mean, we didn't really get into it because it was publishing industry more than it was Hollywood or anything like that. I mean, Sandman, lots of
and
his stuff.
And it's also just, it's so
depressing.
It was written in this really graphic way that was almost pornographic.
But the thing is though, is that again, we're commentators and pundits, but there was plenty of YouTubers who covered it right from the beginning. John Delarose covered it, from the outset of that story over a year ago now. And just now, a lot of these sites are finally starting to pick it up. And it's causing, a whole bunch of kerfuffle in the industry. But it's like we could measure time in MeToo cases. What era of MeToo case are we in right now? Are we in the Harvey Weinstein era? Are we in the Johnny Depp era? Are we in the Marilyn Manson era? Are we in the Neil Gaiman era? What era?
I mean, I'm hoping that the next era of MeToo is non-existent because it's definitely fallen out of fashion. But I do wonder why Marilyn Manson decided to drop his lawsuit for defamation when he did, and if he had a clue that the charges against him were not going anywhere. This was back in November. Evan Rachel Wood's attorney gave a statement to the press after he dropped his lawsuit and was ordered to even pay Evan Rachel Wood's legal fees. They said Marilyn Manson, whose real name is Brian Warner, filed a lawsuit against Evan Rachel Wood as a publicity stunt to undermine the credibility of his many accusers and revive his faltering career. That his attempt to silence and intimidate Miss Wood failed. As the trial court correctly found, Warner's claims were meritless. Warner's decision to abandon his lawsuit and pay Miss Wood her full fee award of almost $327,000 only confirms as much.
Yeah.
So he's cleared of alleged wrongdoing in the legal sense, but he still lost a huge amount of time and money to this whole affair.
Yeah. He is going back on tour, as Colonel Kurtz had pointed out. His
kind of has to.
His career has had a revival, and he's going to take back off on the road. And I mean, he has been back on the road, as we know. But these cases, I really do believe that you're just never going to live in an era where there isn't something like this coming out, right? And the thing about the Neil Gaiman case coming out now is, as a lot of people are pointing out, it's like he was an uber male feminist who talked about listen and believe women. And of course, that graph is almost never wrong about just how dangerous the average male feminist could possibly be, given, based on what their statements are to the contrary. There tends to be the idea that you are covering up for something. Is that the case for him? I don't know, but it doesn't feel like we're ever going to get away from these types of stories. And these ones they're less, the Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively stuff is actually entertaining to cover because the stakes are lower, because it all speaks to weird, stupid Hollywood elitism. When you get into the cases like Marilyn Manson, you get with a lot of pain and suffering and trauma, and that's debauchery. It's just not the most palatable thing to cover on a regular basis, and that's not really the point of this show. If you ask me, would be to kind of give you guys something light to listen to while you're doing other things. And that does not mean that there aren't many people covering this stuff. Obviously, there's a great market for stuff like this, people who want to see the in-depth reporting on these types of stories. But I think Marilyn Manson has a long way to go as far as rebuilding reputation and then coming back stronger.
Since you mentioned that, I do want to shed light on Colonel Kurtz's response to this news. She basically called BS on the LA District Attorney's press release. She said, "Someone asked me if Manson was cleared based on statute expirations or on lack of evidence. Here is my response. By the way, there were never any formal charges against Marilyn Manson, just allegations. Some of the accusations have not expired the statute of limitations." So she's saying that was mostly a political excuse for the DA.
Meaning that if they had the evidence, they could have charged him.
Yeah. But the DA clearly stated in the press release that they did not have the evidence that they needed either. Some time ago, detectives on the case leaked to TMZ that the problem was really credibility issues with the accusers. And it's been a 4-year investigation where they flew across the country interviewing people and even interviewed me. I had no idea they interviewed her. It also confiscated all of Marilyn Manson's electronic devices and went through them for years. They still have them. The police know this guy better than anyone at this point, and if he were the horror movie monster these false accusers claim, there is no way the authorities would allow him to run loose. This case is such a political hot potato that the district attorney has been forced to be very diplomatic. It's also a problem for him because before he took office during the campaign season, when he knew nothing about this case, he publicly aligned himself with the accusers. He just didn't know better at that point. Fortunately, a certain YouTuber made a big video begging him to reconsider, and now that he's just into the office and has actually read the detective reports and talked to case officers, he's done the honorable thing and cleared Manson. Cleared him when he could have instead stalled like Gasson did. That says something. Marilyn Manson is innocent. But, I'm sure that a lot of people in the court of public opinion still need convincing of that. It was just a handful of days ago that the most recent episode of Marilyn Manson Unmasked was released. This docu-series that's still being released about his allegations. Does the shock rocker's pitch black image hide an equally dark reality? That's what the women who accuse Manson of abuse think. No one thinks this is interesting. Yeah. This is all just drivel. This is all legal drivel, and most common people, in their perspective, it's just a flurry of legal issues that follow a celebrity figure that they have not even the faintest clue who they are.
So weird, because I think of Marilyn Manson as in a time similar to like what WWF or WWE was before kayfabe was really broken, and the image of what it was shattered, being like, you don't want to know what the guy looks like without the makeup on. You want to imagine him as the, character on stage.
But that persona comes at a cost.
Yes, it does.
And it got me thinking about the memoir he released. Back in 1998, Marilyn Manson released an autobiography called The Long, Hard Road Out of Hell. And it got universally praised by critics at the time. This was in the late 90s. It was a much different cultural landscape, and things were openly talked about in that autobiography that would not be flying today. It would just not be acceptable to speak of such things, and it would lead to people making accusations today. But at the time, one of the critics said that it's Marilyn Manson's most interesting works, and they said that it takes all the tropes of rock exposés, excessive drug use, gross out groupie debauchery, and studio-bound infighting, pushing them to bizarre, sickening, and compulsively readable extremes. So they're talking about him describing his gross-out, groupie debauchery in his own book. And I heard, from a friend of mine who read this book that she said, yeah, it sounds like all of that stuff actually happened, and it was just okay back then. And now it's not. But, the media is fickle. People that are fickle. And
times change.
Things catch up to you that you thought were going to be acceptable forever, and the tide turns. But I don't know what precedent this sets for MeToo as a whole, if any.
I mean, I don't know. It feels like we're on the tail end of it. Who knows? But then again, my feeling is like then there's going to be a case that's so blatant, so obvious, with so much evidence that it's going to shine a light on it again. I don't know how long it'll take for something like that to happen, but
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media, and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.